Welcome to this webinar for the Retrain Master Program in Leadership for Research Infrastructures. I'm Niklas Blomberg, Director of ELIXIR, and I'll try to talk to you through today how we've developed this distributed pan-European research infrastructure, in particular from a business development and innovation perspective. So what is ELIXIR? ELIXIR is the research infrastructure to connect and long-term safeguard the biological data in Europe. And so we do this by connecting national bioinformatics centers and MBI into one large distributed research infrastructure, and really bring together the data centers, the cloud facilities, and the people from our different member states. We do this for the whole of life sciences, so we work with environmental scientists, bioindustries, agriculture, but also biomedicine and human data. ELIXIR is quite a large organization. We have currently 21 members in 20 countries and one international organization, the European Molecular Biology Laboratory, and that connects together a large number of service providers, over 100 institutes in all our member states. And I think this requires an organization that really drives cooperation at a transnational scale, but we do this on the basis of a long-term support and a commitment to long-term maintenance from our different member states. What do we do in ELIXIR? Well, we help researchers with running archives for data depositions. We help them with data management, things like genome annotations and development of data management plans. We provide and help to secure the long-term added value of annotated databases such as Uniprot and Ensemble, Orphanet. We provide standards and the services that you need to make data interoperable and connect that across domains and across countries. And we also provide the compute services, the tools, and the training that help people use this. And we do this for academic researchers, but as I will explain in this webinar, we also do that for industry, and in particular looking at how we can support small companies to better make use of this open data infrastructure. So why would you want to develop a distributed infrastructure across 20 countries for life science data? So the driver is quite simple. If you look in the life sciences, then data is produced at almost every, large-scale data is produced at almost every institute across Europe. And really we have a problem, or an opportunity, if you so want, to connect data between researchers in the United Kingdom, in Estonia, in Finland, and in Spain. And the data which is produced, say, by a hospital sequencing cancer patients in Finland, they would want to compare them with those sequenced under a research program in Barcelona in Spain. And so that means that we need to help to connect data and collect it from a very large and distributed community, and then reflect it out to a large distributed community again. And it's not only that the community is distributed, the data that we're managing is growing very, very rapidly and has done so for many years. Genomics, so sequencing of genomes from humans, but also from many, many other organisms, has been a strong driver for this, but increasingly this is also high throughput phenotyping data, things like imaging, proteome, metabolome assays, or sometimes very complex data types where they measure a lot of parameters in the field. The other reason to start something like ELIXIR is the open data policies that are coming from many funders, both national and international. And with these open data policies, there is a huge need to help our researchers to put together not only the data management plans, but also the practices and the tools they need to annotate the data within their projects. And this is a very large user community. The European Commission have estimated that there's about 500,000 life scientists in Europe. These are wet lab biologists, bioinformaticians, lab technicians, and so we have a huge need for user training. And the fact is today that most biologists spend an awful lot of time in front of their computer managing and analyzing data. and they need support, they need tools, and they need training to do this. So that's a bit of background to ELIXIR, but this lecture is around business development, business innovation in the context of research infrastructure. And I think a very useful framework to think about business development innovation is the work that has happened in many pan-European working groups around the long-term sustainability and operations of European research infrastructures. These are the recommendations from the expert group and assessment that was published already in 2013, but in 2017 there were two reports, one from S3 and a staff working group document from the European Commission that talked about the long-term practices that help drive infrastructure sustainability. Sustainability sounds very static, and I prefer really to think about this as a framework for developing and innovating around research infrastructures, not only about the science, but also in all the other dimensions that are important for operating a pan-European organization. And clearly, if you look at this report, the scientific excellence and the need to serve our user community is paramount. That's why we exist, and of course that's the main reason why we should improve and constantly innovate around our organizations. But de facto, there are many other dimensions with opportunities to improve the way we are working to serve our users, all the way from training our people, helping to create value in the broader society around industry impact. How can we work better with the e-infrastructures? You could call that supply chain management, but really drive close partnership in the e-infrastructure domain. How do we better understand the socioeconomic value? It's really important for our funders. And of course, we have the governance, the management, the funding framework, and how do we make sure that the data managed, used, and produced by the research infrastructures can be used by a large community. So what I'll try to do in this lecture is to go through some examples within ELIXIR for how we have tried to develop this infrastructure, and I hope that's going to be useful as an illustration to how some of these concepts can be used to drive, if you want, research infrastructure development or research infrastructure operational innovation. We started with scientific excellence. Science is the most important thing, and ELIXIR, we have put together European-wide platforms that cover all aspects of technologies that you need to manage life science data. So those are our data resources, our databases, and the connection between data and scientific literature. But there are also the compute services, the clouds, the data transfer services, and the user management services that people need to connect to resources across Europe. None of that is useful without tools, analysis tools, and we've been working very closely with the tools producing community, both to improve the quality of tools. So how can you better produce open source software? How can you make your software more sustainable? But importantly, how can you string together software in compatible workflows? And how can you deploy those workflows on the various national clouds? If everyone does that in a different way, it's not much use. If we want to collectively work together, we need standards and we need tools for the standards, what we call interoperability, and we're managing that through our standards and interoperability platform. And of course, nothing of this would be of any use unless we train people and create a workforce that have the skills needed to managing data. We try to do this in partnership with research communities, and ELIXIR have worked with the human genomics and translational research community, but we also worked with the marine research community, rare diseases, and our agricultural plant community to make sure that the services match the need of the leading research groups in those fields. How have we done that? Well, the critical part of this, I think, is our international shared scientific leadership. All our working groups, our platforms, our use cases and communities are led by experts, senior experts located in our member states. This is a distributed organization, and we also have a distributed leadership. And I think that's an absolutely critical success factor for a distributed research infrastructure, that you create the co-leadership and you harvest the skills that are available to you throughout your member states. You also have to organize this on a national level, and one of the major outcomes of ELIXIR, I think, is that we've helped to build a network of strong national nodes. All our nodes, our national operations, are funded nationally. They align with the national roadmaps, and so they build on national strength and national research priorities. But most importantly, I think they provide a framework where resources can be managed long-term within each country. A really good example of this is the Swiss bioinformatics network that have successfully managed databases over decades. They turned 20 this year, and they have really helped to propel the Swiss databases into some of the leading in the world. These national nodes are all distributed. They reach out to most of the universities in the country, and the example I show here is our German node, which has 39 project partners over 30 different institutions, and they are organized in 8 different service centers that cover all aspects of bioinformatics, so plant bioinformatics, proteomics, human genomics, and so on. And they in turn then provide services at the local level for the different researchers. You should not have to go to a central archive at the hub located somewhere distantly. You should be able to find a connection to ELIXIR somewhere at the local university, most often at your core facility. So that is a bit about organization, but I wanted to show one example of how we can manage innovation in a distributed infrastructure. And so if you have a federated system with data, people, and tools located throughout our nodes, then for an individual scientist coming into ELIXIR, they don't have the problem of finding a needle in a haystack. They really have the problem of finding a needle in a federated haystack. And so how do we go about indexing? How do we go about describing all our tools in a big, large, distributed research infrastructure organization? Well, one idea that came up, and I think this is a really good example of an idea that turns into something very useful. And that's the innovation. It's not enough with the idea. You need a little bit of process and steer around the idea. The insight that a few people had within ELIXIR is that, well, this is actually this finding a needle in the federated haystack problem is already catered for by the large internet search engines. And there is a standard, schema.org, that allow web page developers to describe the content of apple pies, but many other things in a standardized way. And that can then be harvested by the search engine to provide richer searches or faceted browsing and all of these different things. What is required for us to make use of this is a convention for the biology, and that convention was agreed, and that turned into bioschemas. Bioschemas has now been around for about 1.5 years, so this is a very rapid development. But actually, already in that short time, we've been able to work with a number of the largest data resources in Europe, but actually also in the US and other places throughout the world, to bring this convention into a agreed markup standard that can be used to index data and find data in a distributed system. This idea, the generic standard for data discovery, has also been recognized and brought into a federation architecture in the new European Open Science Cloud. But I think the key here is that we have a really interesting idea that was invented by a few people within ELIXIR, and then by working through a community and with a relatively modest amount of funding, you could very rapidly scale that into a large-scale federated deployment. And so that would only happen with a very concerted community effort, And so these are images from many of the community workshops, organized but most often piggybacked on other meetings that are already happening in the community. And so it's a very targeted community building effort where essentially the larger data and training community co-create the standard and thus feel a lot of ownership into what is created. But it's not enough to build a community. You also need to make sure that you drive the implementation. And so the core bioschemas group have had a very concerted and targeted effort to collect metrics and move towards short-term deployment targets. So I think this is a really good example of how you can drive standardization and innovation in a distributed organization. You need to work on the community. You need to make sure that the people who engage in your infrastructure and your idea feel ownership and enjoyment. But that is not enough. You also need to drive delivery and make sure that you strategically invest the limited resources you have where they can have most impact. Another good illustration of this is the ELIXIR training program, which is also based on a distributed community. The training needs for data management in the life sciences is very large. As I said, we have a large user community, and we also have a very distributed organization where we try to reach users essentially at every university throughout Europe. So to scale this training, we have essentially taken two strategies. And one is to strengthen our national training program to make sure that we provide training for trainers, and so that each of our member states get a larger group of trainers available. But we have also very consistently tried to harvest training material and provide that back to the community. And we do this through a tool that we call TESS, which is our training portal. So through TESS, we collect training material from all the different national training providers, and we make sure that this is available for reuse by the rest of the ELIXIR community and the world at large. We have also co-created training content, so where trainers and experts meet across nodes and create new courses in sequence analysis, genome annotation, and deposit the training material within TESS for reuse by the whole community. One of the real benefits here turned out to be the identification of data sets that can be reused for training. Data sets that are complex enough that all the nuances of data analysis can be illustrated, but still are small enough that they can be easily managed within a 1 to 2 day course. As I said, the training needs are enormous, but the advantage of a distributed research infrastructure is that you can use the national programs and you can use many other mechanisms for training. And we see that the core funded events are less than 10% of all the training that has been provided within the context of ELIXIR over the last 4 years. You also see that it's a very large number of people who have been trained within ELIXIR, and yet this is only a small fraction of the overall life science research community. So we know that the needs are big, and that's why we need to collaborate around things like content provision. So that was a little bit about how we've managed data and how we've tried to address the needs through our internal structures in terms of training and data discovery. But we also said that one of the important roles for research infrastructure is to help industry, and perhaps in particular small and medium-sized companies, to make better use of the open resources out there. In the life sciences, there is a very active industry reuse of open data, and you could argue that this open data is already part of a bioeconomy infrastructure. We see that if we look at patents. So in the 5 years from 2010 to 2015, there were over 30,000 patents that used bioinformatics repositories to identify things like genes, proteins, enzymes, and then that is applicable throughout the bioeconomy. So it's vaccines, pharmaceutical and drug discovery, but also products such as beauty care and industry enzymes. So how would you then help small companies to make better use of data? Well, within ELIXIR, we have run what we call an Innovation and SME Forum, which has been a partnership with our national nodes to run specialized events where local companies can get access to European experts in different areas. Two examples are on this slide. We have had events around food, nutrition and microbiome in Belgium. We have had events around rare diseases and personalized medicine in France, but also in Barcelona and Cambridge. And in total, we've had 7 of these events over the last 3 years with over 300 SME attendees. An important part of these events is that they bring together both the academic and the industry expert around the specific topic. And so we have had around half of the participants at each of our events coming from local companies, often small and sometimes large companies. We have run events around agri-food, we have run it around drug discovery, we have run it around the marine and aquaculture industries, and we've run it around the microbiome. To be able to find these small companies and really try to tailor the events to the need of the local innovation economy, we have reached out and have had good partnership with industry clusters. We've identified and worked with them through the European Council of Bioregions or Europa Bio, but most often our national nodes have had strong partnership with innovation hubs or industry clusters. And through these clusters we've been able to find companies within the area and also have a dialogue on what are the specific needs for these companies in terms of open data. And based on that, we have tailored our events to develop meet the expert training and workshop program that really help to develop the local bioeconomy. Sometimes this has given rise to long-term collaborations. So these are just a few examples of collaborations that have come up in our events. Often it's the use of services. Sometimes it is actually an active exchange of data and skills between the companies and our services. What is interesting, and we've tried to capture that in a recently published report, is that there is actually a very active innovation ecosystem in Europe around these public data resources. And in the report, we are working and interviewing a number of small companies that are essentially basing their business model on public data resources or open source software. And we are looking at how they are doing this as a template for develop industry programs for many of our national nodes. These small companies, they work and create value by customizing public resources and then reselling them. In many cases, they aggregate and integrate these resources and provide value-added analytics on top. And sometimes they are enablers that help other organizations through consultancy to make better use of public data resources. And through their insight and expertise in the data structures, they are able to create value for their customers. So to round this up, I wanted to just summarize and give you a feel for ELIXIR. As I said, we are a Europe-wide organization. Currently we have 21 members and 1 observer. But that translates into over 200 institutes throughout Europe that are connected through our infrastructure. If you look at people, there are over 700 people involved in ELIXIR through our national nodes. This is about half of them at our recent all-hands meeting in Berlin. We run a large internal technical program, and currently we have 21 projects spanning from databases to containers to training infrastructure that help to connect the national nodes. We like to publish the result of what we do openly, and we run an open access, open peer review channel on Faculty 1000, where all our internal reports, white papers and project end reports are published. I talked about training, and currently we have 223 live training events published in tests. Most of them also have open access training material available. And in total, we've had over 350 participants from 150 companies attending to our Innovation and SME program. So with that, I'd like to thank you for your attention. I hope you enjoyed this brief overview of ELIXIR.